How to get started with open source? What is open source? How can I get a job with open source? Wow, there are multiple questions. I get questions like this, almost every alternate days on my DM, and I try to give people answer, but those answers goes one on one. So I thought, why not making a video so that I can accumulate everything together and publish it so that each of you can go through it and get these answers. Hey, this is Tapas. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I keep sharing knowledge on JavaScript, React, web development, content creation, open source. I hope you like my content. And if you're new to my channel, please subscribe to it. Okay, so in this particular video, we are going to focus on two topics. One is what is open source and how you can get started with open source. Once these ideas are completely clear in your mind, the next video is going to talk about how can you get job opportunities using open source. I'm going to share everything out of my experience, what I have realized by contributing to several open source projects and maintaining a bunch of open source projects by myself and creating community around it. Job through open source is possible. Collaboration, communication through open source is possible. But the first thing that you need to know and learn, what is this open source about? And how you can get started in open source and how you can actually sustain in the open source community or open source culture. Once you have a clear idea about it, I think we can be able to discuss about the jobs and other opportunities that open source can bring you. All right. I hope you like this video. So let's get started. Let us get started with understanding what open source is all about. So there are a lot of buzzwords, there are a lot of talk around open source. But the clarification has to come in a way which you can relate and you can understand. You are seeing a human kind of picture on the screen. Do you know who is that? Any idea? What if I tell that this is you? And all the arrows that are coming out from you are the possibilities that you can actually bring in on plate and do in your developer life, right? So what are those possibilities? You can design an application, you can be a designer, you can code. Of course, you're a developer, so you can code. You can test, you can deploy, you can write content, you can do marketing, you can do sales, you can manage project, manage people, you can write about solution, do UX, do accessibility, do performance, do security, do teaching, mentoring, whatever possible. You can do more things that probably we have not identified. Maybe you are doing a DevRel, you can do a dev advocate, you can do bunch of things, bunch of possibilities. And you know what? In each of these sections like code, test, deploy, there could be more. In code, you can be front end, back end, full stack. In test, you can do unit testing, end-to-end testing, automation testing. In content, you can do documentation, videos, the one that I'm making right now or I'm sharing with you now. You can write blog, management, you can do project management, event management. You can do bunch of things over there. Now, for a moment, if I just replace you with a product or an application. Now, can you relate that every arrows that you were seeing around you, the product actually can do it? A product has a design scope. A product or a project has a coding scope, testing scope, deployment scope, content, marketing, sales, each of these things. Now, some products may have all of this. Some products may have just a subset of this, but it will have some amount of scope that you yourself as an engineer, as a software developer or person who is building things can actually take part of. So you and product almost doing the same thing. It means that you are doing things, some of these things or all of these things for a product. Now with the same concept, you and product taking in your mind, let's move to understand what this particular product is doing. So for every product, they will have some kind of source code, right? A code that is kind of running this product. Even it is a product like it's a low code and kind of thing. Even there are some amount of code that gets generated at the back end. You may not be worrying about, and for some of the product, you might be writing those code to make this product be alive and working condition. Now if this is a code, if the code is viewed, changed, extended and distributed publicly, it means the code that anybody can view, the code that anybody can come and change, the code that anybody can extend to add additional feature, the code that anybody can distribute. If that is the things, if this is open for all, if this is free, we will call that code as an open source. Okay, so this is a definition. This is by definition. Now, there are variants of this definition we'll get into in a moment. But at this point of time, a project or a code called open source code, if the code is open to view, change, extend, and distribute. Okay, this is the definition. Anybody ask about what is open source? This is what it is. No rocket science. And if such code is used in a product, that product will call open source software or OSS. Okay, so this is by definition. Our definitions are clear. Now there are a few things I want to call out over here. Viewing the code open to all is fine. Changing the code open to all is fine. Extending is fine. Distribution, it may not happen always seamlessly in open source world. It depends on what kind of licenses that open source project has. Some project you would have seen the license like MIT, some are ISC, some are like, some other licenses like Apache 2. So based on each of these licenses, the terms will be and the conditions will be declared, like to what extent you can distribute it. Again, if you want to change any code directly, it is open to all, but you have to follow certain process that open source project define. We are going to talk about that. We're going to learn that in detail. So I hope at this point, open source, what is open source software is clear to you. You liked it? If you liked it, please like this video as well. All right, so let's move to the next one, understanding. Now, we started with you. We replaced you with the product. Now I'm replacing the product with open source, right? Because the product itself can be open source if those conditions are met. It is, open to view, open to modify, open to extend, open to distribute. So it is an open source project. That means an open source project also have all this scope for you. So if you are an engineer, can pick one or more those items, you will be able to contribute to an open source project. Okay, so this relationship is now established. You got my point. Let's move on. What does it mean by open source contribution? What exactly open source contribution that people are talking about? It is really some simple term, but somehow I have a feeling like it has been presented a little bit complex way. There is no complexity actually in open source contribution. As we know that the code is open, as we know that anybody can view the code. So it means that you will be able to kind of pull it out and run it locally by yourself. You will be able to provide a feedback like, hey, this is a feature that you want to add. You will be able to fix an issue if you find an issue. You will be able to improve the documentation. You will be able to propose a design. You will be able to extend the code to add your feature and publish it somewhere. So there are varieties of opportunity, varieties of contribution opportunities that are available in open source. To start with, you can add feature to an open source project. Okay, you can fix issues. You can improve the UX, the usability part of it. You can help documentation. When you're getting started with an open source project, there might be certain documentation that you are actually reading through and you find, hey, something is missing. This is not really giving me the required information. Now I figured out how to do it. Let me go ahead and add that into documentation. That makes your contribution. No contribution is really, really less and low in the open source world. Even if it is just about writing text, not code, this is also a valuable contribution because you are going to save somebody else's time who will be looking into this documentation tomorrow. Okay, so helping in out in the documentation, you can test it. If you are not a developer but a tester, you can test it. You can write automation test cases. You can write manual test cases. You can do the testing stuff. You can do code review. If you are a developer who wants to give feedback on the code side of it, you can join the open source project as a reviewer. You can create content, right? So our open source project, how people will come to know about it. You can write content about it. If you are a blogger, write an article about that open source project, share with people so that people will find that project, because once you are in open source project, you are the equal stakeholder to it. You are a contributor, you are a collaborator. So it is also your responsibility that you become more vocal about that project. You share more knowledge about that project. So go ahead and create content. Build community. This is very important, right? Not everyone has to get started with building their own communities, but what everyone as a developer can do, they can help growing one existing community. So if you are joining an open source project and if there is a community already around it, go take part in it. Share your learning, seek for feedback, provide feedback, talk to people, network, and try to build this community, try to sustain this community. As you're going through each of this point, did you realize that open source contribution is not only about coding? Except that add features, add fix issues, I have not spoken about coding at all. There are a bunch of other points which are like no code contribution or the low code contribution. That's something that you have to hook into. Open source is not about just coding. Open source is more about collaborating with people, figuring out like where you can actually help, where you can actually get help from, making friends, making networking, at the same time, make the project sustainable, make the community going. That's what is about open source contribution. So these are the things that you can do. And the last thing is like advocacy as well, right? You can talk about it, you can be a dev advocate or dev relations in the open source contributions. So these are the things that you need to keep in mind when it comes to open source contribution. I hope this is clear. Now to move on, let's understand what's your gain. Why should you do it? Why to contribute to an open source project at all? So the first thing that you need to look about is upskilling yourself. You are working as a student, maybe in some kind of freelancing. You have certain opportunities to use certain tools and technologies. You are working in an organization where you have an opportunity to learn certain framework or learn certain technologies. But it might be the case always like you aspire to do something else. You aspire to learn something else. You may be doing something like API building, but you want to do on React. You want to do on front end, or you're doing on front end work on at your office, but you want to do on machine learning, or you want to do some kind of AI project. So how do you actually fulfill your aspiration? At the same time, how do you upskill yourself? What are the different ways that you can do it? Open source is the right choice for you, because here you can actually find varieties of project. How do you find the project? We'll get into that in a moment. You find varieties of project, and the project, if it matches your interest, you go ahead and start contributing to it. This is a way that you can learn it. In my opinion, with my experience, open source is a field where you can contribute while learning and you can learn while contributing. Both are possible. So you can upskill yourself, you can make things better. Maybe an application, an open source product that you yourself use, you want to make it better. You can do networking and communities. Guys, this is very, very important. And I think this is one of the biggest takeaway, a biggest gain that you can have from open source project. And we'll touch base in our next video when we talk about jobs and opportunity. So open source communities, if you really make part or take part in right way, you can build a lot of networking and the communities aspect around it. You can connect to a lot of people whom you can help and also can get help from. So this is really, really important. Make sure that you be engaged with the community and start doing networking. Understand the product development life cycle. So you are a developer, I am a tester, he is a designer, she is a DevOps. These roles are probably separated out in a bigger organization. But when it comes to an open source world, it is open to you, like what do you want to pick up. And even if you are not working in all the aspects of it, at least you understand that how the things work end to end. From the design of a small feature till it goes to the customer who is using that open source product, how things travel end to end, you have a great knowledge about it in the open source world, because everything is very transparent, everything is very clear, very open to everyone, right? You can get a chance of mentoring others, or you can get a chance of being mentored by others in the open source. So that's a great gain. And of course you come to know like how to manage open source projects. So once you, as a contributor, once you gain some knowledge, the next thing that you can actually start doing is, why don't I kind of start opening my open source project? I can create my open source project, and whatever I have learned, why can't I just start practicing about it, right? So that is the next thing that you can do. Back your portfolio. We'll touch base again this one in the next video where we talk about jobs and opportunities. In my opinion, open source project contribution should be extremely well highlighted in your resumes and your portfolio. So you can always back your portfolio with a contribution, even if the contribution is a documentation changes. You are actually impacting some other developer's life or user's life in a great way. So every contribution matters. Okay, so how does it work? This is important for you to understand the entire workflow of open source. How does it work? We understood what is open source. Now we're going to understand how does it work. All right. So in open source project, there will be someone who is a maintainer. This person probably the one that who would have started this project. And there could be only one maintainer. There could be a bunch of maintainers coming together who are managing this open source project. Like, what are the rules? What are the standards? How things should work? What kind of feature that we want to add in our pipeline, roadmap. These are the things that maintainers job is. They maintain the entire project basically. Now along with maintainers, there will be a bunch of contributors who are helping this maintainer to sustain this project with their contribution. Could be feature contribution. We told about all type of contributions that we can do. Now once they want to make a contribution, this is a flow that we're going to talk about, possibly for something where you have to take part in either code or no code kind of contribution. So there will be a repository where the source code exists. It's an open source project, so we'll be talking about source code exists. Now the source code can be the actual code or the code for documenting this particular project, both of this, or could be a UX repository. It can be anything basically. So there is a repository exists. Now the contributors, the folks actually start contributing to this, and once they start contributing, they will be probably forking this repository. Now here a few things that you to know, and I'll also cover that once you want to contribute to open source project, you have to have some basic skills of certain things, like you have to know how Git works, how GitHub works, because these are the technologies most of the open source projects are using. So you got to know. So fork is a terminology from GitHub, and if you are not aware of it, I have a video created like how to fork, how to learn fork. I have an open source project about how to learn forking. Please check this video in my YouTube channel, and you can actually learn about forking very easily. So you fork it, you change it, you request for merge, your changes get merged, and another user comes, they fork it, they change it, the request get merged. Once the merge thing happen, we start building the stuff that you have to deliver to our end customer. So this is where your DevOps, your CI/CD, all these things come into picture, right? So it's not only about the coders, not about the front end, back end, and the API guys. It's also about the DevOps folks who can come, who can help in building, packaging, deploying. So the things gets deployed, maybe deploying publicly, and at the end, your end users actually getting it, right? So next time anybody wants to fork it, change it, things get merged, the build kicks off, deploys happen, gets deployed, your user gets the next version of the things in their hand. Okay, so this is how the entire workflow work. This is one of the workflow that most of the application follows, and there will be a different version of this workflow possible. All right, so we know how does it work. Now, to get started with the open source contribution, there are certain prerequisites you have to keep in mind. You have to make sure that you have one or more of this. First, curious mind, because you have to explore a lot of stuff by your own. You can always ask for help, but you have to make sure that you explore things by yourself so that you can figure out certain answers by yourself. And if you don't figure out certain answers, you can actually start contributing to the project so that other person can figure out things very easily, right? So curious mind, you have to have a basic knowledge of Git. If you're new to Git, I've created a video extensively for Git operations. Please check out on my YouTube channel. You'll get the Git basic. GitHub, I have created a video again for the GitHub familiarity. Please go ahead and check it. You will get GitHub familiarity, like how to use GitHub and things like that. Forking, merging, we already spoke about it. Markdown. So the language in the most of the things like documentation and the open source project uses a Markdown syntax. So if you're new to Markdown, again, there is a video created. Please go ahead and check out like how to work on Markdown and how to create documentation in Markdown. So you need to know a bit of Markdown as well. You have to have patience. This is a soft skill, not hard skill, because in open source community, mostly you're dealing with people who don't know each other in daily basis, but they still need to work. They probably have their main work, they probably have their school, colleges, and things like that, but still they have to help you. They have to contribute to the project. So if someone is not responding for a moment, please have patience, have patience and ask others to have patience. That's the way that things will work out. Be humble and responsive. You cannot sustain in open source community and culture if you are rude. Or if as a maintainer you are rude, your community is not going to grow because others are not going to be with you. So be humble, be responsive. If you're working on an issue and you're not really working on it for last 15 days, and somebody else can actually pick up and work on it in the meantime, but you're holding it unnecessarily, it's not good. Comment on that issue, comment on the pull request, or comment somewhere on Discord or Slack, wherever the community exists, that you are busy, you cannot take it up. Let somebody else take it up and do it for you, right? So, these are the characteristics that you can actually take care of. Now, how to get started? We understood everything about open source. The next point is, how do we get started? Of course, there are varieties of avenues, varieties of places where you can actually go, search, and find out the project of your choice that suits you the best. Okay, so here are a few that I have listed down, and link for each of these things there is in the description of this video. So go pick it up, go try it out. If you have further questions, please post a comment. I'll respond to you back. So things like Contributor Ninja, you can actually sort things like the projects. GitHub Explode is a big thing that you can actually go and start the project that you want to contribute to. First contributions is another side. You have first timers only, you have code triage, you have up for grabs. So these are varieties of websites that are available to help you to pick things, pick the project, filter it based on the language that you are interested in, pick with the level, like you are a beginner or expert, pick with the type of feature, like you want a documentation contribution or a code contribution. So some of the sites also provide you that kind of filtration, and then they filter out the bunch of projects in front of you. Then you go to each of these project and see whether the project is still kind of trendy in a way, like the people are still using it or contributing to it. You can see the last commit when it was made. Is there a community associated with it? Where does the community live? Does it live on Discord or Slack? Go to the Discord and Slack, say hi, I want to contribute, talk to maintainers. You can actually ask maintainers, like, can you have a quick call, or is there a documentation where you can actually get started? So that's how you go. You filter down your project using each of this site, then look whether the project is still active. If it is active, see whether there is a community associated with it, means how to actually reach out to people, how to reach out to maintainers, or how to get started basically for that particular project, and then get started. That's it. Get started and continue doing this. So this is how you get started. All right. Now, in every year, the month of October, there is a program happen. The celebration of open source happen. It's called Hacktoberfest. So this month is an encouragement for everyone who wants to start contribution with open source. They can actually start in this one. Of course, there is a goal of at least 4 contributions, and then you win some swag and things like that. So usually I see there are a lot of spike in terms of open source contribution only in October, but unfortunately, when November comes, the spike drops off. Why? Because people are so motivated to get started in October, and they feel that, okay, they are done with this one, the open source contribution for this one, and that's it. No, that's not it. The Hacktoberfest, the only purpose is to encourage you to get started. It's not the purpose that is the only month when you should be doing the contribution. You should be doing the contribution throughout the year. Of course, based on your bandwidth and frequency, but throughout the year. Hacktoberfest is just a lever for you to kind of get started, get motivated. So my request to everyone who wants to be encouraged with open source, use Hacktoberfest wisely. Use it as a way to get on track with open source, but make sure the November, December, January also you are making contribution. And once you do that for the following 3 to 4 months, it is going to be a regular practice for you. So please do that. That is very important. I want to introduce one more mention. The project that and the community that we are building is called React Play. This is another open source project. You can check it out, reactplay.io. So we also have a community on Discord. So if you are a web developer and want to grow in terms of React, JS, Next.js, GraphQL, Postgre databases, authentication, authorization, like a full stack game, this is a project for you. Come join. If you have further questions, please reach out to me. Ask, I'll get you onboarded. So just wanted to have that mention as well. Now, things to look out for. We are coming towards the end of this video. Things to look out for before you start, contributing to open source project. Make sure the project has a clear README so that you understand, what to do. If it doesn't have a clear README, but still the project excites you, make sure that you reach out to the maintainers or you improve the README, post your first contribution to it. It has open source licenses, like what kind of licenses it has, like MIT, Apache 2, BSD, what kind of licenses that particular project has. Based on that, the code sharing and all these things comes into picture. So please read about the licenses. Contributing guide. Each of the projects will have certain guide how you can contribute to this project. Please read through the contributing guide before you get started. You will get a lot of information from that. If the project missing a contributing guide, it's an opportunity for you to create a contributing guide and tell maintainers, hey, I have created a contributing guide because it's essential for an open source project to have a contributing guide. Code of conduct, like how you should behave in the community. Okay, if there is a bullying happen, if there are certain things happen, whom to communicate, whom to contact, whom to report. So this is something that you need to know. Again, if this document is missing, there are enough templates available. You can create one and you can actually contribute. Encouraging community. Always look for if the open source project is also backed by an encouraging community. Usually the communities exist on Discord, Slack, this kind of on this kind of product. So you can actually find out like where the community is there, engage with the community is very important. And for each of this project, on GitHub, under the Insights tab, you should be able to find this checklist. This is the checklist a maintainer of the project should follow. This determines that a maintainer have gone through this checklist completely and he or she checked everything for the contributor to look into and feel a great amount of confidence. Hey, this is the right project for me to contribute to, because the maintainers are really serious about it and they have actually added a full readme, added a code of conduct, a contributing guide, license information, security policy information, how to create issues, in case I found in the project, how to create pull request, what kind of template, everything is set up. This is an ideal project for me to kind of, get started. So these are the things to look out for. I hope it was clear to you. All right. So some of the common feelings as an open source contributor you might get, and I want to talk about that common feelings. One is, I don't know to code. Open source is not my thing. We spoke enough. Like, open source is still your thing because coding is just a small part of it. There are many other parts that you can do. We spoke about it, like all the parts that you can do. So yeah, you should definitely take part in open source contribution. I know to code, but I don't know that technology. Okay, so do you want to learn the technology? Do you want to learn about machine learning? Do you want to learn about Vue.js? Do you want to learn about QuickJS? Yes, if so, yes, open source is a platform for you to learn. I told this is a platform where you can learn while contributing, you can contribute while learning, right? So definitely you should give it a try. Open source does not maintain enterprise standards. This is a myth. But the case is like, no, there are a bunch of open source product available you might be using in your daily life where there are a bunch of people behind to maintain all possible standards, right? Open sources are not easy to maintain. It depends. Like, if you have a good team, if you are a maintainer who is very serious about continuing these open source projects, serious about building the community behind it, you will find it easier. You will find it kind of take it along with you. But if it's like there is no community, there is no helping hand, your project, you are not able to grow, not able to give time, that is when it is actually difficult to maintain, right? We can create a separate video for maintainers, but for this one I won't kind of get into too much deep on this particular point. OSS is free. Do you think so? I don't think so. So the source code may be open for changing and things like that, and some of the end products, some of the end OSS product could be free as well for use. But there are a lot of open source projects where code you can go change, contribute and things like that, but the end product may not be free. There might be a free plan, then there might be a pro plan, there might be some other plan. So code may be still free, but the open source software, the end product, may or may not be free. So this is another thing that you need to keep in mind. And there's a very common feeling that open source is for beginners. No, guys, open source is not only for beginners, it's for everyone. So irrespective of how many years of experience you are, if you want to get started, keeping in mind all these things that we have learned so far, you can get started with open source. You can really rock it. You can really do awesome things with it. So these are some of the common feelings. And if you want to see my contribution to open source, I live here on my GitHub. So you can actually go and check it out and see, like, if you find something good on my GitHub as well. And at the end, I want to leave you with this book, this ebook that I've created. It's on FreeCodeCamp right now. I've also provided a link to it in the description of this video. You can go and fetch it. This is going to help you out almost with everything that we spoke about, maybe some few additional points. So you can actually keep this handy. So people, was it useful? I hope it was. So if you learned about open source and how to get started, what to do next? The next logical thing is to get started, right? All right, so let's get started. And if you have any confusions, if you have any further questions, please put a comment so that I can clarify your doubts, I can clarify your questions. Once you start on open source, once you understand the concept behind it, the culture, the community, the next thing comes is like what kind of opportunities you can actually gain. Could it be job or it can be something else? So stay tuned to the next video where we are talking about the opportunities from open source. All right, until then, take a great care of yourself. And if you have not subscribed to this channel, press the subscribe button. See you.